In 2006, Greg Kading was given the task of reinvestigating the murder of Biggie Smalls. This happened after Biggie's mother had launched a $500 million court case against the LAPD. The following year, Greg retired, and it seemed as if the murder of Biggie Smalls and Tupac would never be solved. Or would they? Tomorrow night, Greg appears in Vicar Street at an event titled Solved, the Tupac and Biggie Murders. Greg, good afternoon to you.
Hey, Sean, how are you
Well, I
today?
hope that's not false advertising. You're calling it solved. You're really...
Absolutely solved.
You're nailing your
Come
colours.
find out why.
Yeah. Why did Biggie's mother take the court case?
Well, she believed a theory that was posed by a predecessor of mine, a detective named Russell Poole, back in 1997, had posited a theory that some LAPD officers were involved in a conspiracy to kill Biggie. He left the job, published his theory, and she fell into that. And believing what he had espoused, she launched a lawsuit against the LAPD. Well, it wound its way through the courts for years and years, and it wasn't until 2006 when the LAPD got serious about the lawsuit and began to bring in some investigators to reinvestigate it.
Right, okay. And sort of was part of your brief, if you like, to make sure that it didn't have anything to do with the LAPD or officers within it.
Well, I think the LAPD at that point in time was very confident that they weren't culpable, but they allowed us free rein. They said, here's the books. Go figure out what happened. If it turns out that there's LAPD involved, we'll just have to deal with that. So there was never this idea that, here, go disprove this.
Yeah.
Because it hurts us. It was just go find out what the truth is, and that's what we did.
At the time of the first investigation of the murders, were kind of most of the facts there anyway, that it was obviously something to do with a dispute between two record labels, between the Bloods and the Crips.
Yeah, absolutely. On the face of it, it's relatively simple. The conflict, you could see, anybody could see what was going on. There was this big rivalry between a record company on the East Coast and a record company on the West Coast, and the CEOs of those companies were warring, the rappers were warring, and the gangs that were affiliated with them were warring. So, yeah, the writing was kind of on the wall.
Yeah, okay. So really, was it about who actually pulled the trigger rather than who might have been, if you like, largely responsible for these murders?
Well, I guess it depends. Oh, obviously, the trigger man is the most culpable, but co-conspirators are equally, accountable or should be held accountable for the murders, solicitation, and the conspiracy to kill.
Yeah, and there was also one of the many theories going around was I think Tupac somehow faked his own death. Where did that come from, and how was that supposed to work?
I think that people find it difficult to accept that somebody as iconic as Tupac Shakur, somebody with the kind of potential that he had, could be snuffed out by somebody the likes of maybe a gang member. So it's difficult for them to digest that. And I think that they just like to fantasize about the idea of him being alive. It just brings them whatever satisfaction.
Right, but are there people out there on the internet putting together what they regard as clues? Because, as you know, anything can be proven on the internet.
That's right.
But there are people like that then, are there?
Oh, I deal with them every day.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
all right. So, but you retired in 2007. Had you finished your investigation at that point, or were there more questions to ask?
Yeah, no. So Sean, I get assigned it in 2006, and then I leave late 2009. So I was on it for
sorry,
three years.
My mistake. Yeah.
So it was in 2009 after we've developed our findings, and I realized that that they were they were the definitive answers, but the public wasn't aware of it, and so I was compelled to step out, and I had to leave the job in order to do that. So I wrote a book, and that took on a life of its own. And
why didn't the LAPD decide to publicize what you discovered?
Well, for the LAPD, if you haven't taken people to court and brought justice through the judicial system, they don't recognize it as it's not their responsibility to go out and publicize what the findings are.
Yeah, sure. So, and what happened to the court case?
The court case was dismissed. Voletta Wallace and her attorney, once they found out what we had discovered during our investigation, retracted their lawsuit, realizing they weren't going to spend any more money, after something they couldn't prove.
Yeah.
So they dismissed it.
Yeah. As far as you know, does she believe that conspiracy existed, or has she changed her mind?
Well, of course she did believe that for many years. But I had an opportunity to sit down with her and talk to her and reveal our findings and how we discovered those facts. And then she changed her opinion of it.
Yeah. Is it difficult to discover those facts if you're a white cop working in LA?
It can be. There are certain challenges because of, some of the racial barriers that we might have to deal with, which is one of the reasons why I grabbed my partner, Darren Dupree, who's African American and a really good detective and had a real clear insight into the hip hop world. So that was one of the reasons that I selected him as my co-case agent, because he could overcome those barriers.
Right. But even at that, though, he might be African American, might understand hip hop. He's still a cop.
He is.
And there, one gets the impression that there's a sense of, well, this is our fight. We're keeping it within our community. It's nothing to do with you.
To some extent, true. The gangs and many of the witnesses in these two murders were gang members. And so, they stuck to their gang culture's code, which is not to cooperate with law enforcement. So, we had to figure out ways to overcome that barrier also.
Yeah. Ultimately, then, these two deaths were just a complete deaths usually are a complete waste, but these were spectacular examples of that, it seems.
Completely avoidable and unnecessary murders, deaths. They should not have happened. And unfortunately, two really talented guys with great potential we'll never get to see lived out.
Yeah. Well, and presumably you in Vicar Street, you will actually tell people who pulled the trigger.
All the details.
All the details. Okay, well, that's happening tomorrow night in Vicar Street. Greg Kading is the retired LAPD officer who will be there. Greg, thanks very much for talking to us today.
Moncrief on NewsTalk.
Sponsored by Avantcard. Choose personalised pricing. It's made for you.